What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that Raymond and Ray is no perfect movie. And in this film, Raymond and Ray are two half brothers played by Ewan McGregor and Hawke, who reluctantly reunite to go to their father's funeral. But their father was a pretty abusive man, so when all the other guests at the funeral keep coming up and saying sorry for your loss, he was a good man, it obviously gets on their nerves. But when they read their dad's will, discover the bizarre circumstances of the funeral procession, and discover some guests that they had no idea even existed, it leads them to ask some serious questions over whether or not they really knew their father or each other, and whether or not it's time to forgive their dad and move on. And this is going to be one of the movies I saw at TIFF that I will look fond the most of for a very personal reason. Halfway through the festival, my dad actually texted me out of the blue and said, Raymond and Ray is general admission, so there's no assigned seating. So, would you like some company? And the answer to that was wholeheartedly yes. As much as I love going to TIFF, for spending a week and a half on your own in the big city with very few people to talk to, it does get pretty lonely. So instantly I bought him a ticket. It was a 9 a.m. screening on a Saturday morning, so my dad had to get up super early and drive a long while to get there, but anyone who knows my dad knows that that's pretty easy for him by this point. And Dad, thank you. Thank you so much for coming with me. You had done a lot for me beforehand trying to get me tickets for this, but coming out to see a show all together was maybe the best thing that you could have done for me. And watching a movie with my dad about two grown men with daddy issues, there's a little bit more pressure for the movie to be good, at least in my opinion, but having seen the film and witnessing what these two had to put up with, it made me feel a lot more grateful for the dad I had. And it ended up becoming one of the best movies I've seen all year altogether. It's by no means something that's fresh or original. We've seen storylines and characters like this before where it's about grief and forgiveness, and it's technically been told a hell of a lot better. But this movie isn't about being unpredictable. It's about being identifiable and emotional. And through the performances, the direction, and the screenplay that takes all these familiar tropes and tells them in a much more subtle way, it gets the job done. I'd say that this movie is worth seeing just for the performances of Ewan McGregor and Hawke. They were both fantastic, and they played much more restrained characters than we're used to seeing from either one of them, where they both have subdued and nuanced personalities for differing reasons. Now, don't get me wrong, when we see them interact for the first time, you know for a fact that Ewan McGregor is going to be the straight-laced, polite one, meanwhile Hawke will be openly sarcastic, bluntly honest, and a constant underachiever who's really only there at the funeral because, without spoiling anything, McGregor actually can't go without even Hawke. So there's that conflict about them. But these characters are much more three-dimensional than tropes like this than we've seen before. Ewan McGregor is not a stick in the mud for absolutely no reason. He's not even a cliched stick in the mud. He does have his own anger issues that I will get into later, and when it comes down to Ray giving sarcastic, snide remarks to him every time he says or does something stupid, McGregor always has something quippy to fire back on, which is something you don't really get from the uptight loser in movies very often. The two of them had genuine brotherly chemistry where they'll be at each other's throats within one scene, and then seconds later, once they take a deep breath, they immediately forget about it, and in the same scene, they talk about something else that is a much more pleasant conversation, and it felt so genuine and realistic. The movie even makes a very compelling case as to why Ewan McGregor's character Raymond really should be straight-laced. With the dysfunctional as hell upbringing that the two of them had, as an adult, he just wants to be in charge of the decisions and the circumstances within his own life. He wants to gain the sense of stability that he never had before growing up. And you can totally believe that he has learned what not to do from his abusive father. The nicest thing I can say about McGregor as the lead character is that he never comes across as annoying or domineering. He actually has this soft-spoken line delivery and very fragile-looking facial expressions that make him the much more mature but sensitive of the two. Whenever he tells Ray to get his shit together, to stop giving googly eyes to a girl, or just in the very first scene to come with him to the funeral so that they can get this sense of closure, he's completely justified. And you believe that he's technically the smarter, more mature of the group. But with every revelation that comes at him towards the funeral, and believe me when I say this, even if you can predict some of the twists that happen in this movie, they still come out of nowhere. They are still fucking brutal. And it becomes clear that as much as he boasts about how good it is to face your fears and like confront the worst aspects of your life so that you can get closure, there's still some decently traumatic events that he still hasn't addressed to himself. And with every revelation just hitting him in the face, especially towards the end, it becomes a lot harder for him to bottle up his emotions, especially when Ray is the one telling him to be honest to himself, not to other people, but towards himself about the thing that he hates the most about his father. And it led to probably the most bizarre moment in the movie involving his dad's casket that was simultaneously depressing but also fucking hilarious at the same time. I couldn't believe that this movie was actually being shown at TIFF. But make no mistake, even Hawke is the character that you connect with the most, and he surprised the hell out of me with this film. He nails every aspect about this character that you've seen in other movies, but you want out of this character, where yes, he's an underachiever, but he's not trying to make anyone's life a living hell. He does set his eyes on any pretty girl that he sees, regardless of where they are, how long the relationship will last, and it led to probably one of, if not the funniest lines I've heard in any movie this year. He's not afraid to speak his mind towards anyone. In fact, if you do or say something he doesn't like and you don't knock it off, he will knock you off your feet. So when he actually does show up at the funeral and people are expressing their condolences towards him, you're expecting him to say something dark. But every time he's at the funeral, he actually keeps to himself and becomes just as socially withdrawn as his brother. And all the funeral guests, when they look at how they're much more soft-spoken in their line delivery and they're very stilted in their expressions, they just assume, oh, they're the oldest, they're the sons, they're the ones who are in a desperate time of need. But because of all the time we've spent with them beforehand, we can see the true pain that just being there makes it too hard for them to be their usual selves. And in Hawke's case, he instantly snaps out of it once he starts to build this really great relationship with a woman his father knew, played excellently by Sophie Okonedo. The two of them had terrific chemistry that led to some of, if not my favorite moments in the entire film, where there's something about her that I don't want to spoil that reminds him of a woman he once had a great relationship in his life. She feels different from the other women he's dated. And as opposed to most of the funeral guests who say, I'm sorry for your loss, he was a good man, she actually asks, what was he like to you as a person? And just how different of a question that is compared to what you're used to as a funeral makes him a hell of a lot more comfortable to express the cold hard truth about what their father was like and how at the end of the day they're still grieving for a bad person. And she doesn't protest that. She doesn't say, well, what about this? She just trusts his judgment because he's the expert on this. And she starts to share her own stories and experiences about his father that deeply affects Ray and makes him consider the possibility that he had redeeming qualities and actually loved him a lot more than he would let on. It doesn't absolve the father of anything, but at the same time, Ray gave up on a lot of people and passions in his life because he was so used to his dad saying, it's never going to last, you're not going to be good enough. And because that was the thing he constantly heard growing up, and he barely had anyone in his life to encourage him, if anybody did encourage him, they either left for reasons I don't want to spoil, or he completely pushed them away. He has this, he really chose to listen to his father, and you can tell he has a lot of remorse and regret for that. And when he discovers something about his dad that he never knew about, and would have changed his relationship within a split second, he wants to build his life back up again. He wants to rekindle his passions, but he can't escape this feeling that it might completely fall all over again, and the initial assumption that his dad had may come true after all. I really like this movie, what can I say? And this movie was actually directed by Rodrigo Garcia, who is mainly well known for directing TV shows like Big Love and especially In Treatment. So I didn't really know what he was going to bring to the table. This was actually based on a script that he wrote, which is actually pretty decent. And I will say this, his visual style is one that I really wish we saw more of with small scale movies like this, where it doesn't draw attention to itself. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if some critics are going to say there's bland direction, there's no style to it. That is complete and utter bullshit. It is meant to focus exclusively on the performances and highlight the visual expressions without relying on standard shot reverse shot coverage that cuts away every time a character talks. He likes to start the camera in one area of the setting where the characters in focus who are leading the discussion are in the frame. And he likes to either zoom in or push forward on them as the conversation intensifies, or as characters walk around and move to a new setting, the camera follows them alongside, almost like a Spielberg wonder. In fact, there are some shots that are really just a standard two-shot of Raymond and Ray riding in a car talking, and that's really all we need, so that our eyes are constantly moving back and forth, giving the scene the sense of energy without you really realizing it. Now, I wouldn't technically say that these are actually Spielberg wonders, because most of them do cut to a different angle within the same setting to focus more on a close-up of one character because the conversation is hitting them the most. But even that feels justified. And the whole new perspective shift has a very obvious meaning about the fact that these characters have differing perspectives on who the deceased was as a person and the anger management issues that they are trying to deal with the entire time. Now, not really one. There are some minor flaws I have with the film. Outside of Sophie Okonedo, the side characters are nowhere near as compelling as they could have been. A couple don't even really mesh with the tone of this film. This is a dark comedy drama that is grounded in realism, where the dialogue is supposed to feel very natural, and there are characters that feel a lot more cartoonish in comparison. Raymond also strikes up a relationship with a woman his dad knew, played by Maribel Verdú, I believe is how you pronounce her name. And don't get me wrong, she was funny, and her purpose in the movie is also to try and help Raymond come out of his shell. She does offer some insightful commentary as to what he should be doing as opposed to what he is, but her personality and some of the choices that she makes felt weird and a little too out of place. For every insightful comment or action she does make, there was something before or after that just made it hard to take that statement seriously. Same thing with Vondi Curtis Hall from Daredevil as the preacher residing over the funeral. He's this hip, flashy preacher whose cross looks more like bling. It was really weird. It felt like this strange mixture of Tony Robbins versus an actual preacher. And maybe if he spent more time trying to console the brothers in their time of need with the hidden insightfulness that he has, that would have made things better. And he does technically have one-on-one conversations with them, but I honestly don't remember what they were. He wasn't in the movie enough to really have a long-lasting impression, but probably the one thing I do hate about this movie is something I can't even go into detail on because it takes place during the last 20 minutes of the movie, but let's just say I don't like the resolution of Sophie Okonedo's arc. I know for a fact that it's supposed to leave you feeling empty and feeling disappointed in a particular character. As if to say there are some people who just don't learn anything, but I didn't feel like it was foreshadowed enough for it to be convincing. It felt like it came out of nowhere in comparison to some of the more predictable twists within the film. And I felt like it went against a lot of the characters' actions in this movie. And on top of that, yeah, you know what? I can't even talk about it. And the reason I don't want to talk about it is because if I give away the slightest detail, I'm worried it'll scare people away from seeing this movie. And a lot of people are not looking forward to it because it is a generic story. We've seen characters and settings like this before. But again, it's the emotions that you get out of this movie through Ethan Hawke, Ewan McGregor, Sophie Okonedo, and Maribel Verdú on a couple of occasions, especially with Rodrigo Garcia's script and direction that take the familiar, and he doesn't make it fresh, but he makes it feel fresh. And that's more than enough for me personally. I was entertained, it was hilarious, it was tragic, bittersweet, and like I said before, it made me appreciate my dad and my granddads a hell of a lot more. And for all of those reasons, I'm going to give Raymond and Ray a 4 out of 5. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If you have seen Raymond and Ray, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews, and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.